Segment 1. You've never worn a uniform, 1,000 words. The June morning sun poured through the tall, arched windows of the House Armed Services Committee room on the second floor of the Rayburn building, but the light felt cold. 5 months to the day since Pete Hegseth had been sworn in as the 29th Secretary of Defense, and the Pentagon was already bleeding credibility. Everyone in the room knew why he had been called to testify. The official agenda read, routine oversight. The unofficial agenda was survival. At the witness table sat Hegseth, flanked by a silent, stone-faced phalanx of Pentagon lawyers and senior civilians. Behind them, the seal of the Department of Defense hung like a shield. In front of them, the elevated committee dais curved like a judge's bench, packed with members who had flown in from every corner of the country for this moment. The Republicans were smiling. They had come for a public execution, and Hegseth was their chosen weapon. He did not disappoint. He leaned forward into the microphone, the practiced cadence of a decade on Fox News rolling off his tongue, and fixed his eyes on the one Democrat he had been briefed to fear most. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas, 43 years old, civil rights attorney, first elected in 2022, already the owner of a half-dozen viral moments that had left Republican witnesses stammering. And with all due respect, Congresswoman, Hegseth began, voice rising with theatrical indignation, you've never worn a uniform. You've never stood post. You've never made the decisions that keep Americans safe at night. The words landed like punches. Republican members nodded approvingly. A few let out low, that's right murmurs. Cameras in the press gallery above clicked like machine gun fire. Hegseth was just warming up. You're a civil rights attorney from Dallas who's been in Congress less than 3 years, he continued, gesturing broadly for the C-SPAN lenses. What could you possibly teach this committee, or me, about military leadership, about sacrifice, about what it means to serve this country in uniform? He paused for effect, letting the silence stretch. This is political theater, he declared. Someone who's never served a single day in uniform trying to score cheap political points against a combat veteran who led men in battle. 2 Bronze Stars. Iraq, Afghanistan, while you were giving speeches in the Texas legislature. Scattered applause broke out from the Republican side of the dais. One member actually clapped his hands together like he was at a campaign rally. Democratic members bristled. Representative Adam Smith of Washington, the ranking member, half rose as if to object. Representative Ruben Gallego, a Marine combat veteran, leaned forward with fire in his eyes. But Crockett caught their glances and gave the smallest shake of her head. Let him talk. She sat perfectly still, hands folded atop a thick leather portfolio, expression unreadable. Hegseth smelled blood in the water. He had been warned about her, viral takedowns, meticulous preparation, a courtroom style that made witnesses regret waking up that morning. He was determined not to become another clip on Twitter. Frankly, Congresswoman, he said, voice dripping with righteous fury, it's insulting. To the 3.4 million active duty, reserve, and civilian personnel I lead to sit here and be lectured by someone who doesn't understand the first thing about military culture, about chain of command, about the weight of decisions at... Mr. Secretary. 2 words. Quiet, calm, almost conversational. But the room went dead silent so fast it felt like someone had flipped a switch. Jasmine Crockett had not raised her voice. She had not stood. She had not lifted a hand to be recognized. She simply spoke, and the entire gravitational field of the hearing shifted. Republicans who had been nodding along froze mid-nod. Democrats leaned forward as one organism. The press gallery, normally a constant rustle of typing and whispered commentary, went completely still. Even the stenographer looked up from her machine. Crockett reached into her portfolio with the deliberate slowness of a surgeon selecting a scalpel. She withdrew a single document and held it high enough for every camera in the room to capture it clearly. You've spent the last 5 minutes questioning my qualifications, she said, voice still calm, almost gentle, which somehow made it more menacing. So let me ask you about yours. She set the document down with the soft finality of someone placing a loaded pistol on a table. 3 female general officers have resigned from the United States military in the past 31 days, she said. All 3 cited a hostile command climate created by this administration in their official exit interviews with the Department of Defense Inspector General. She paused, letting the number sink in. 3 generals. In 1 month. She looked directly at Hegseth. Can you explain why? The silence that followed was not ordinary quiet. It had weight, texture, mass. It pressed down on the room like the air before a coastal storm rolls in. Hegseth's mouth opened, closed. His jaw worked soundlessly. His eyes darted to his chief of staff seated directly behind him, who was already frantically scrolling a tablet. Face going pale as he realized this line of attack had never appeared in any prep binder. 10 seconds passed. 15. 20. The press gallery, usually incapable of silence for more than 3 seconds, remained frozen. Phones were out, but no one typed. Everyone just watched. Finally, Hegseth reached for his water glass, a classic Washington-style tactic every trial lawyer in America recognized instantly. Actually, Crockett said, cutting through the silence like a diamond blade through glass, let me be more specific. She pulled out a second document, and the storm began. 2.5s. Segment 2. The 3 generals' 1,000 words. Crockett held the second document aloft, so the DOD seal caught the light. Lieutenant General Patricia Hammond, she began, voice still level, almost soft. 32 years of service. 2 combat tours, Iraq 2004-05, Afghanistan 2010-11. First woman ever to command the 82nd Airborne Division. She submitted her retirement paperwork 3 weeks ago. She lowered the page just enough for every camera to see the official header. I am reading directly from her exit interview with the Inspector General, Mr. Secretary. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Quote, the current leadership at the Department of Defense has made it clear, through both policy discussions and personal interactions, that female officers are not valued or wanted in combat roles. The hostile environment created by the Secretary's public statements and private attitudes has made it impossible for me to continue to effectively serve. End quote. The room detonated. Democratic members were on their feet. Republican members stared at their phones as if the screens might save them. The press gallery transformed into a hurricane of clicking keyboards and whispered calls to editors. 3-star just accused Hegseth of driving women out. Yes, I said 3-star. Chairman Michael Turner, ROH, pounded his gavel like a man trying to hammer nails with a rubber mallet. Order, order. The Congresswoman has the floor. Crockett waited, hands folded, expression serene, while the chaos swirled around her. When the noise finally ebbed, she continued as if there had been no interruption. General Hammond was not alone. She placed the first page down and lifted another. Major General Lisa M. Jaster, 30 years of service. Ranger School graduate, Class 10 to 15. Former commander, 1st Security Force Assistance Brigade. Her exit interview. Under current leadership, we are witnessing a deliberate regression to 1950s-era attitudes about women's capabilities and roles in combat. I will not ask my soldiers to serve under commanders who do not believe in them. She set that page atop the first. And finally, Brigadier General Sarah K. Thompson, 28 years. Commanded the 1st Special Forces Group Support Battalion in Okinawa. Her statement. I cannot in good conscience continue to serve under leadership that fundamentally questions my right and the right of the women I lead to defend this country. Crockett laid the third page down with the others, aligning the edges with precision. 3 general officers, all combat veterans, all citing you, Mr. Secretary, all in the last 31 days. She leaned forward slightly. So I will ask again, and this time I would appreciate an answer. How many more generals are we going to lose before you figure out how to lead them? Hegseth's face had gone from Fox News tan to an angry, blotchy red. His chief of staff was now half standing, leaning over the rail to whisper frantically in his ear while scrolling a tablet that clearly had no answers. The Pentagon lawyers exchanged glances that said, in the universal language of Washington, we are so screwed. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. 25. Finally, Hegseth opened his mouth, but Crockett was already moving. Before you answer that, she said, pulling a single sheet of congressional letterhead from her portfolio, Let me address the 5 minutes you spent questioning my credentials." She held it up. "Yes, I am a civil rights attorney from Texas. Yes, I have been in Congress less than 3 years. What you omitted, Mr. Secretary, is that I spent my legal career defending active duty service members facing discrimination, including sexual harassment and racial bias, in the military justice system. I am licensed in Texas, Arkansas, and all federal districts in between. I hold a JD from the University of Houston with a concentration in constitutional law and a uniform code of military justice." She lowered the page but kept her eyes locked on his. "I served in the Texas House during the most conservative legislative session in state history. As the only black freshman and the youngest black lawmaker in the chamber, I still filed and passed more bills than any other first-term member. Several of those bills protected returning veterans from employment discrimination and predatory lending." She set the biography down. "I currently sit on this committee. I read every budget justification book, every readiness report, every IG finding that crosses my desk. I may never have worn a uniform, Mr. Secretary, but I have spent years studying the people who do, and I have done my homework on the man currently failing them." She reached back into the portfolio and produced a thick document with a distinctive blue cover. "This is the Department of Defense's own monthly readiness report, May 2025. Unclassified executive summary, as required by 10 U.S.C. Section 117. The same summary provided to Congress every month for 20 years. She flipped to a tab page. Page 37, paragraph 4. "Service member confidence in senior leadership has declined to the lowest level recorded since the metric was created in 2003. She looked up. "Lowest in 22 years, Mr. Secretary. On your watch, after just 5 months. And the decline began in February 2025, the month after you took office." Hegseth muttered something about classified context, but his voice lacked conviction. Crockett smiled without warmth. "It's not classified. You are required by law to give it to us. I'm simply assuming the Secretary of Defense has read his own department's reports." His chief of staff was now frantically flipping through an identical blue binder, realizing with visible horror that no one on their side had ever expected a member of Congress to actually read the thing. Crockett's voice dropped, quiet and dangerous. "But troop morale and generals resigning are symptoms, Mr. Secretary. What concerns me most is the cause." She opened a new folder, thicker than the last. "When your nomination was announced, I did something that apparently no one else in this town bothered to do. I went back and read everything I could find about your previous leadership positions. Every tax filing, every whistleblower complaint, every exit interview, every court filing." Hegseth's jaw tightened. He knew exactly where this was going. "I found a pattern," Crockett said. "A very clear, very consistent, very predictable pattern." She paused, letting the words settle like dust after an explosion. "And that pattern tells me everything happening at the Pentagon right now is not bad luck. It is not partisan attacks. It is not anonymous sources." She looked straight into his eyes. "It is simply who you are." Crockett turned to a large easel that had been quietly rolled in by a staffer moments earlier. She flipped the cover sheet to reveal an enlarged 2008 IRS Form 990, blown up so large the numbers were visible from the back row. 2007, she began. "You leave active duty at age 27 with no management experience whatsoever and are immediately named Executive Director of Vets for Freedom, a political nonprofit." She tapped the revenue line. "First full year, 2008, you raised $8.7 million. Congratulations." She moved her finger to the expense line. "You spend $9 million. You overspend your budget by more than $300,000 in 12 months. She flipped to the next page, 2009 tax return. "By January 2009, your own letter to donors states the organization has less than $1,000 in the bank and is $430,000 in debt. $430,000 in debt with 10 employees. She let that hang. 2010 revenue collapses to $268,000. 2011, $22,000. $22,000, Mr. Secretary. The organization effectively dies. It has to be merged with another group to survive. You are pushed out. She laid the tax returns down like autopsy photos. Donors at the time told reporters their money was wasted on parties and luxury travel. A forensic accountant had to be brought in to untangle the books. She looked directly at Hegseth. You could not manage 10 people and a $10 million budget without bankrupting the organization in 4 years. Hegseth opened his mouth. She raised one finger, not rude, simply final, and he closed it again, but that was just a warm-up act. She flipped the easel to a new set of documents. 2013. Despite that spectacular failure, you are hired as president and CEO of Concerned Veterans for America, a much larger organization backed by the Koch network. She pointed to the 2014 deficit line. First full year under your leadership, $428,000 deficit. 2016, the year you leave, $437,000 deficit. $75,000 in unpaid credit card debt. Same pattern, bigger stage. She lifted a 7-page document stamped whistleblower complaint. February 2015. Multiple former employees filed this with senior management. I have it here, redacted for privacy but perfectly legible. She began reading, clinical and calm. Allegation 1. The president treats organizational funds as a personal expense account for partying, heavy drinking, and using CVA events as opportunities to pursue sexual relationships with female staff and attendees. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Specific incidents. December 2014 Christmas party. Grand Hyatt, Washington, D.C. The president became so intoxicated he had to be physically managed by staff to prevent inappropriate interactions with female employees. That event had a strict no-drinking policy. February 2015 Louisiana event. The president had to be physically restrained from climbing on stage with dancers at a gentleman's club. May 2015 Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. Defend Freedom Tour. Multiple witnesses report you and another individual closing down a hotel bar, shouting, "Kill all Muslims." "Kill all Muslims," repeatedly. The room exploded again. Representatives shouted over each other. Phones in the press gallery lit up like a Christmas tree. Hegseth shot to his feet. That is categorically false. I was never even at that. Are you calling your own employees liars, Mr. Secretary? Crockett asked, voice still level. Because I have signed witness statements. And I have the email one of them sent to your successor the day you were forced out. Subject line. Congratulations on removing Pete Hegseth. Quote, his despicable behavior, the drinking, the inappropriate conduct with female staff, the racist outbursts. I watched him pass out in the back of a party bus and urinate in front of the hotel where our team was staying. This man should never be in leadership again. She set the email down. You resigned in 2016. The organization paid you a 6-figure severance and made you sign an NDA. That is not what happens when someone leaves on good terms, Mr. Secretary. That is what happens when an organization is desperate to make a problem disappear. She paused only long enough for the wait to settle. One more stop before we come to the present. She flipped to a final blown-up document. A 2017 Monterey, California police report and settlement agreement. October 2017. A woman files a sexual assault complaint with the Monterey Police Department. No criminal charges are filed, but you pay her $50,000 and she signs a non-disclosure agreement. So the story will not derail your Fox News contract during the height of #MeToo. Hegseth, voice tight. I was protecting myself from a false accusation that would have cost me my career. Crockett nodded slowly. 2016. CVA pays you 6 figures and an NDA to go away. 2017. You pay an accuser $50,000 and an NDA to go away. Same playbook. When there is misconduct, when there are consequences, when accountability comes knocking, you don't fix the problem. You don't take responsibility. You write a check and you silence people. She stepped back from the easel, so the entire timeline was visible. 2 organizations. Both collapsed financially under your leadership. Both ended with whistleblower complaints about drinking and inappropriate behavior. Both terminated with non-disclosure agreements and large payouts. That is not coincidence. That is not partisan spin. That is not ancient history. That, Mr. Secretary, is a pattern. She turned to face him fully. And now you are running the largest, most complex organization on planet Earth with an $850 billion budget and 3.4 million souls. Tell me, Mr. Secretary, why should this time be any different? Segment 3 ends with the pattern fully exposed and the question hanging like a guillotine. Crockett did not wait for an answer she already knew would never come. She moved to a second easel that had been wheeled in during the brief recess. A large poster now dominated the front of the room, a timeline titled The Hegseth Pattern, 2025 edition. Mr. Secretary, she said, voice still calm but now carrying the weight of inevitability, we are 5 months into your tenure. Let us examine how the pattern is repeating, only this time with the United States military instead of a nonprofit. She pointed to January 2025. You take office on January 20th. By the end of the month, you announce a comprehensive review of all military family support programs. Funding is immediately frozen pending review. Result: military spouse unemployment, which had been declining for 3 straight years, spikes 18% in 1 quarter. February. Recruiting numbers for the Army, Navy, and Air Force all dropped double digits compared to the previous year. The Pentagon's own analysis attributes the collapse to uncertainty about policy direction and leadership priorities. March. The Navy is forced to cancel 2 major joint exercises with Pacific allies because of administrative confusion originating at the OSD level. That is a direct quote from the Chief of Naval Operations After-Action Report. April. Marine Corps Commandant submits a classified memo to the Joint Chiefs. Deep concern about readiness degradation due to lack of clear strategic guidance from the Office of the Secretary of Defense. May. Air Force reports the lowest pilot retention rate in 15 years. Exit interviews cite loss of confidence in senior civilian leadership as the primary reason. She stepped away from the timeline and lifted a thick binder. These are your own monthly readiness reports, Mr. Secretary. Every highlighted line is a metric that was improving when you arrived and began declining the moment you touched it. She opened the binder and began flipping tabs like a prosecutor presenting evidence in open court. She then produced a stack of diplomatic cables bearing State Department headers. While you were freezing family programs and confusing the services, our allies were taking notes. She held up the first cable. German Ministry of Defense to State Department, February 2025. Grave concerns regarding the Secretary's apparent lack of understanding of NATO alliance obligations. Second cable. French Ministry of Defense, March 2025. Requests urgent clarification after you gave contradictory public statements about Article 5 in 2 consecutive interviews. Third cable. The one that made even Republican staffers wince. British Ministry of Defense, April 2025. Formal diplomatic note filed after the NATO ministerial dinner in Brussels. Multiple Allied ministers reported that Secretary Hegseth was noticeably impaired and made inappropriate and sexist remarks toward female defense ministers from 3 nations. Chairman Turner tried to interrupt. Congresswoman, some of these are unclassified summaries provided to Congress under NATO reporting requirements, she finished for him. The classified versions may be more colorful, Mr. Chairman, but these are the ones we are allowed to read into the record. She set the cables down and lifted a new stack. Congressional testimony transcripts. March 2025, Senate Armed Services Budget Hearing. Senator Blumenthal asks you a simple question. What is the current end strength of the United States Army? You answer 485,000. The actual number is 450,000. You were off by 35,000 soldiers, 3 entire divisions. She flipped to the next transcript. April 2025, this committee, Representative Gallego asks about the Navy's 30-year shipbuilding plan. You cite numbers from the 2023 budget. You had not bothered to read the current year's plan. Another transcript. May 2025, Senate Appropriations. Senator Murray asks about Air Force readiness. You give fighter jet sortie rates. She was asking about transport aircraft. You did not know there was a difference. She closed the transcripts. 5 months. You command the most powerful military in human history. and you cannot answer basic questions about the force you supposedly lead. Then the final document, the Inspector General's preliminary report, still warm from the printer. Since January 20th, 2025, 15 Senate-confirmed political appointees have resigned, requested transfer, or been removed. The highest four-month turnover rate in the modern history of the department. Multiple four-star officers have delayed long-planned retirements to provide continuity during this period of leadership turmoil. Senior civilians and uniformed officers have created formal and informal workarounds so that critical decisions do not require the secretary's signature. Translation: the building is protecting the country from its own secretary. She let the report fall to the table with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent chamber. 5 months, Mr. Secretary. In 5 months, you have accomplished what Russia and China have spent billions failing to do. You have degraded American military readiness from the inside, without firing a single shot. She walked back to the timeline poster and placed her hand on the final column. January, May 2025. Every single metric on this board was predicted, on the record, during your confirmation hearing. Senator Warren sent you a 33-page letter with 72 questions citing 11 separate incidents of alleged excessive drinking and the whistleblower reports we just reviewed. Senator Duckworth, who lost both legs in Iraq, asked how someone who had never managed more than 50 employees could possibly run an organization of 3.4 million. Senator Reid laid out the entire pattern and asked if you were prepared for the most complex management job in government. You dismissed them all as partisan attacks. You were confirmed by one vote, and every warning has come true. She turned to face the committee, then Hegseth. Combat bravery is real. Your service in Iraq and Afghanistan is real. No one here questions that. But bravery on a battlefield 20 years ago does not automatically confer competence to manage the largest organization on Earth today. Your record does not show competence. It shows a consistent, documented, undeniable pattern of failure, financial chaos, toxic behavior, and avoidance of accountability through payouts and NDAs. And now that pattern is playing out again. Only this time the organization cannot be merged, cannot be quietly shut down, and cannot be silenced with a six-figure severance package. She paused, letting the silence do its work. Mr. Secretary, the United States military is not a nonprofit you can bankrupt and walk away from. It is not a cable news gig you can protect with a quick settlement. It is the shield of the Republic. And right now, that shield is cracking under your leadership. Segment 4 ends with a full indictment delivered and the room holding its breath for the final blow. Segment 5, you can't NDA the United States military, 1,000 words. Crockett stepped away from the timeline and walked to the center of the well, holding only one sheet of paper. The room had gone unnaturally quiet. Even the press gallery had stopped typing. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Mr. Secretary, I did not come here today to relitigate your confirmation. I did not come here to score partisan points. I came here because 3 generals, 3 combat-tested, decorated, extraordinary women, decided they could no longer serve under your leadership. And because thousands of others are quietly making the same calculation right now. She held up the single sheet. This is draft legislation I will introduce next week, the Military Leadership Accountability Act. It will do 3 simple things. Establish minimum qualifications for any political appointee to the office of the Secretary of Defense, successful prior management of a large, complex organization, or equivalent experience. Require independent vetting of all allegations of financial or personal misconduct before a nominee can be reported out of committee. Create protected channels and whistleblower safeguards for uniformed and civilian personnel who report toxic or incompetent leadership at the highest levels. Because patterns predict future behavior, and the pattern you have demonstrated for 18 years is failure followed by payout, followed by silence. She laid the draft down and looked straight at Hegseth. You bankrupted one veterans organization. You drove another into ground amid drinking and misconduct scandals. You left both with NDAs and severance checks. But here's the difference this time, Mr. Secretary. You cannot pay the United States Army to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You cannot write a check to make 3 generals unresign. You cannot buy off the Inspector General. You cannot silence 3.4 million service members with a six-figure settlement. You cannot NDA the United States military. She turned to the dais, addressing every member, Republican and Democrat alike. During confirmation, 50 senators voted against this nominee. They cited these exact concerns. They were called partisan. They were told combat service was qualification enough. 5 months later, every single warning has been proven correct. Not by me, not by Democrats, by the Pentagon's own documents, by our allies' diplomatic cables, by generals who put country over career. This is no longer about left or right. This is about whether we are willing to watch the most powerful military in the world be managed by someone whose only proven skill is failing upward and silencing critics with money.